You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 272. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. How many times have you told yourself that you wish your practice felt more sustainable? This is something that lawyers will often say to me, that their practice feels out of control, that they have a hard time keeping up, that they just don't know how long they can keep up the pace, that it does not feel sustainable. And today's podcast episode is all about looking at sustainability from the perspective of getting back on track. And the reason that these two go hand in hand is that if you ask me, the practice of having your systems in place, of feeling in control of your practice, of having a handle on your time and practice management is part of what gives you that feeling of peace of mind. It relieves stress. It makes your practice feel more manageable. You feel more confident as a result. And so when you're able to sustain your time management practices, your practice overall feels better, right? It feels sustainable. And one of the key ingredients to having that, to having time management systems that actually work for you, is the ability to navigate the challenge of falling off track, right? This whole podcast series that I've done over the past 4 weeks, and if you're joining today, you're joining at week 4, the whole podcast series, episodes sort of 269, 270, 271, and now 272, are all designed to help you get back on track. When your time systems fail, how do you get back on track? And they all lead you to this idea of sustainability. So today's episode is all about sustainability, right? How to integrate the getting back on track aspect of your practice to create a practice that feels more sustainable, which is what so many lawyers want. So I'm so glad you joined me here this week. To recap, the topics we've covered in this particular series are: number 1, getting back on track, why time management systems fail. So you can go back to episode 269, and that's where I talk about the main reasons why your time management systems fail. And spoiler alert, one of the key takeaways from that episode is that your systems will fail. And it's not a reflection that the systems are inherently flawed or that you are inherently flawed. This is just to be expected, right? Anytime we set up a plan, a strategy, a process, we can expect that there's going to be some friction. We can expect that there's going to be some setbacks. And that is part of it. That is the first thing that we need to really accept when it comes to having a time management system that feels sustainable. And when it comes to developing the skill, the practice of getting back on track. So then the week that followed, so in the second week of this series, what we talked about was the ingredient that differentiates people who get back on track from those who do not. And the key takeaway from that episode was that being on track, having a system, is a choice. It's a choice. It is optional. And if you choose to have that system, it is a practice. And to get back on track, what we really need to commit to is the decision to get back on track, even when the system fails. And that is a huge part of solving the problem, because if you're committed to the outcome, there's no way you can fail, right? There's no way you can fail. You're either learning or you're winning, and you can tweak and you can adapt. And as long as you've made that commitment, your systems will continue to evolve along with you. Number 3, the third episode in this series. So last week's episode was all about how to recover after a setback. So in that case, what we looked at were, number 1, taking an assessment, an inventory of where you are based on the external factors like your calendar and your workload and all those things, and also the internal factors. Like, how are you feeling in the moment when your systems fail, right? When you have fallen off track, it's really important to take that assessment and to accept where you are. And then from there, we want you to be allocating time to getting yourself back on track, right? To identifying what needs to be done, to doing what needs to be done, and to getting back into planning, right? Planning your following week and then testing. So that really encapsulates the key messages from those first 3 episodes. And today's episode is the final installment. And sustainability is where I want to leave you, because that is where you want to go with this, right? You want your practice to feel like something that is repeatable, that you can do over time. And so the really key element for sustainability is to become a person who is really, really good at this process, who is really strong, who is quick, who is nimble, who is able to get back on track. And the faster you can get back on track, the better. Not always possible. I get it. Sometimes you fall off track and it's a big one and it might take time to rebuild. But the faster you can do that, the more sustainable your practice is going to feel. So today we've got 4 points, and I'm going to walk you through those 4 points. And as I do that, I hope that you are thinking about your practice and how this relates to you. So the first point is, if we're looking at getting off track and getting back on track as part of sustainability, we want to be looking forward into your practice, and we want to predict. We want to predict where you are most likely going to fall off track. Now, this takes us back to episode 1, where we talked about some of the common reasons why lawyers fall off track in the first place. And so some big ones, vacation time, right? You can expect that you're going to take a vacation. Maybe there's that pre-vacation workup, right? Where you're getting everything organized for your trip and then you're exhausted the first few days of your trip. That happens. Or you get back from your trip and all the paperwork is piled up. There's emails and there's paperwork and there's admin, and you can't remember what was even happening in your practice. So there's getting ready for that. There's the situation of having a really busy and intense period at work. So I gave the example of a big trial or a closing if you're a solicitor, where you're really running on all cylinders, right? You're working really, really hard. And next thing you know, that thing comes to an end and you're almost in this vacuum, right? It's like all of a sudden it's very quiet, and the motivation that you had to get through that really challenging period, it is no longer there, right? The deadlines are much longer. The nature of the work is much less intense. And so you might predict that that's going to happen. And maybe it's illness, right? And maybe it's not that you can predict that there is an illness that is going to come up. Maybe somebody close to you needs extra care. Maybe you yourself are scheduled for a surgery or something. And so you can anticipate that there's going to be some downtime. So these are all times where you know, right? You know that there's potential for falling off track, and that if it were to happen in that situation, it would be expected. It would be completely normal. So once we can predict, right, we know kind of what the usual suspects are for your practice, then that brings us to step 2, which is to have a plan, right? Much like when you step onto an airplane and you're about to take off, there's a protocol to follow in the unfortunate event that something were to happen. And so we want to give that same thought to the situations that might arise in your practice where you might need a little bit of extra support. And you can think about this from the perspective of being proactive and also responsive. So proactively, if you can anticipate that one of these events is coming, you've got a trial, it's in the books, and you know what's happening, then you might enlist extra support around that time, both at work and outside of work, right? You might dial up the support that you have in your personal life to make sure that there's groceries to eat, that you're eating reasonably well, that you have clean clothes to wear, that if you've got kids, there's additional support for the kiddos. It could also be at work. You have a place to filter work that you can't do in the short term. So you want to think about how you can set yourself up proactively when you see that you've got something big like that on your plate. And then also you want to be thinking about responsive, right? After the trial, right? Are you setting yourself up to go to the office the very next day and perform at a really high level? In which case you may be setting yourself up for disappointment, because if you are exhausted, if you have that trial crash, you've been burning the candle on both ends and now you lack the energy. Maybe your system is catching up with you. All the adrenaline that was pumping through your blood is now just like gone, and you can't do anything unless there's an urgent deadline. So you want to plan for that and give yourself the space that you need, the care that you need, the rest that you need, so that you can reintegrate into your work life without putting all this pressure on yourself to perform at a super high level. You may need time, and so we want you to be preparing for that. If you've taken a leave of absence, for example, you've been away from the office for some time, whether it's mat leave or another type of leave, then you want to give yourself some time as you reintegrate. Maybe you go back on a gradual schedule. Maybe you ramp up from whatever, 50% up to 100%. Maybe you're not going up to 100%. But again, you want to be mindful of how you're going to set yourself up for success instead of assuming that you're going to step in, that everything is going to be, as it was beforehand. It may not be. And so we want you to be kind to yourself. We want to be planning for that so that when you're in that situation, you're better able to manage. So that was step 2, right? Step 1 was we want to predict where falling off track is likely to occur. Number 2 is we want to plan where we can for how to support yourself in the time leading up to it, during those periods if they're particularly busy. And we also want to be planning responsibly how we care for you when you are done with the big project. Now, another thing that I might just add here is that if it's a slow period, right? Sometimes what we find is that our practices look like roller coasters. And so if you have a practice that has those ebbs and flows, then you might also want to be preparing yourself for those down periods, right? Where the office is really, really quiet. And maybe you're scheduling vacation for that time, or you're ramping up your business development efforts in the time leading up to those times in order to mitigate, either by not being in the office when it's particularly slow, taking advantage of that to take some holidays, or by building up your workflow so that those ebbs and flows are not quite so pronounced. So again, that's just thinking about it from a bit of a different lens, is that sometimes we're forecasting and we're anticipating it's going to be really busy, and that is the problem. And sometimes it's the opposite. It's going to be very quiet, and that is the problem that we're trying to address. So that brings us to step 3. And this really is more of a mindset question, right? A mindset and a proving to yourself that you can do it question. So I could probably break this down into 2 points, but we're going to deal with it under one heading for this episode. And the first thing that you want to do, right, is if you're thinking about these ebbs and flows, and you're thinking about sustainability, and you're thinking about these episodes where you fall off track and you have to get back on track, what we want to do is start looking at that almost like a test, and not a test that you're going to fail and there's a mark at the end of it, but more like a test as an opportunity to strengthen, right? And so if you're familiar with the concept of a growth mindset, it's a concept that Carol Dweck came up with in her book, Mindset. It is distinguished from a fixed mindset. And the real crux of a growth mindset is that you see challenges as opportunities to learn and get stronger and to get better. So instead of a challenge representing failure, you're not good enough, strong enough, smart enough, whatever, to have this, you're stuck with this challenge. To the contrary, this challenge is there as an opportunity. It's like your curriculum. It's a way that you get to learn. So if we can start to look at these setbacks, right, getting off track as a challenge and something that you're going to get really, really good at, then the focus becomes on building the skill. And that can shift you away from that sort of more failure-oriented thinking. How did you end up here in the first place? This is bad. I shouldn't be here. To more of a constructive, okay, what do I do to rebuild here? Because we know that if your systems are a part of your practice, we know that your systems are going to fail at times. We know that you're going to need to practice the art of getting back on track. Then we can look at this as a challenge that we are taking on, and it's one that we are choosing to take on. And an analogy that I think is probably quite apt here is when little toddlers are learning to walk, right? And they fall over and they push themselves up, and they fall over and they push themselves up. And it is the pushing of themselves up, right? You can imagine little chubby baby arms, and they're pushing themselves back onto their feet. That's strengthening them, strengthening their legs, their arms, their bodies, so that they can hold themselves upright. And that's really what you're doing here, right? The better you get, right? The key to this episode, the key to sustainability is getting really good at that practice of getting back on track. Because if you can get yourself back on track, then you have nothing to fear, right? You can fall off track, get back on track. It's not a big deal. You can do that. You know you've got that resilience. You know you've got that strength. So the first part of that is the mindset, right? Seeing this as a challenge that you want to take on. And then by getting yourself back on track, you're building up the evidence, you're building up the examples, proving to yourself that you can do it. And one of the most common things that I hear from lawyers when we're talking about confidence and building confidence, and lawyers who are facing a situation that is maybe new to them or maybe challenging, one of the things that they will tell themselves, and you might tell yourself this too, is I've done hard things before. I've done this before. I've done something similar to this before. I know I can do this because. And so the more times you can get back on track, the more this becomes normal to you, the more that you have proven to yourself that this is just part of it. You got it. You can handle it. And then that sets you up for doing it with more confidence, doing it more smoothly. So these first three, right? These three strategies that I'm recommending here, right? Predict where you're going to fall off track, plan what you're going to do before and after, proactive and responsive, adopt that growth mindset, and prove to yourself that you are really good at getting back on track. All of these are skills that will help you with the art of getting back on track. And before we sign off for today, I also want to highlight a fourth point, which is this. If you find, right, that you're implementing these strategies, right, you've listened to this whole series and you are doing what you can to get back on track and you still keep falling off track and you don't think it's a systems problem, it may be that it's a bigger picture problem. And one of the things that I'll often talk about in my coaching practice is small p procrastination versus big P procrastination. And I think it's a helpful analogy because we can all relate to procrastination and how sometimes there are these little things that we push off, right? It's the argument that we don't want to start drafting because it seems really complicated. And so we push it off, right? And it's relatively discreet. And with the right techniques, we can overcome the procrastination of not wanting to get started. But when small p procrastination starts to add up, what you start to notice is big P procrastination. And that to me is where there's something bigger behind the scenes that is creating the procrastination. It's not so much, do you have tips and tricks that can help me initiate the task? It's more like there's something foundational that we need to address here in order to overcome the procrastination. And that is what I would offer here as well, that if getting back on track, if sustainability feels like a real problem for you, if this is a small s sustainable versus a big S sustainable, then what we really want to look at is there something else going on in your practice that is not sustainable? And what you might be asking yourself in that case is there an alignment issue, right? If you think about what you really want for your practice, where your values are, where your strengths are, where your interests are, is there a misalignment? Is there a reason why you keep on falling off track that is beyond what we've talked about in this series? And if what you're noticing is actually there's something more here, then that might be an opportunity for you to start exploring what that might be. And so I would encourage you to give yourself permission to take that step back and say, okay, I'm doing all the things. I've got my systems in place. Everything should be working. I know how to get back on track. I've been doing this. So why is it so hard now? And it could be that there's a bigger shift at play. There's something else going on. And so we want to make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to explore what that might be, if indeed that is what is causing the feeling of your practice not being sustainable. So that, my friend, my dear, dear listener, I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you again for joining me today. Thank you for joining me for the past 4 episodes to talk about this really important and relevant topic of getting off track, how to get back on track. To recap, we started out week 1 talking about why systems fail and why you get off track in the first place. Week 2, we talked all about the decision to get back on track and how it's pivotal for actually following through and succeeding. We talked last week about the actual steps required in order for you to go from feeling like you're off track to actually getting back on track. And then finally this week, we talked about sustainability. And that was really about predicting where you're likely to fall off track, having a plan ready, having a mindset, right? This growth mindset. This is an opportunity to learn. You're proving to yourself you can do it. You're getting really, really good at it. You're just like, that toddler gaining strength. You are gaining strength at getting back on track. And then finally, that bigger picture, right? Is the sustainability question one of systems that need adjustment, or is this something a little bit more going on? And for any of these questions, if you would like my support, you are, of course, welcome to reach out to me. I would absolutely love to speak with you about any of these topics. And I'm here for you, right? I am here to support you. I'm here to offer validation that you are not alone in any of this. And if what you want are systems and structures and sustainability, and you want someone who can help you with that, I'm here. I'm here to help you. And one final thing I'll mention, I haven't mentioned it in the other episodes, although it's relevant, is I do have a podcast roadmap on topics related to time management. So we'll link to that with the notes with this episode. It might be a really good place to go to get some ideas about systems and time management generally. And if any of that speaks to you, then of course I would love to speak with you about that. So thanks again for joining me. I hope you are having an amazing summer. If you're listening to these episodes at the time they go live, if it's beyond summer at some other time of year, I hope you're doing well. Maybe you listen to these episodes all in series, in which case I hope you're having a lot of success implementing the frameworks, the strategies we talked about here. And of course, if you have questions, you know where to reach me. So thanks again. And I look forward to reconnecting with you again next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.